The year is 1881. The place, Tuskegee, Alabama. With 2,000 residents, most of them people of color. It's the smallest county seat in the state. Anti-black violence is not uncommon. Segregation continues to separate the races, socially, politically, and economically. Yet it is here that young Booker T. Washington will bring Tuskegee Institute into being. Barely 24 years of age, this young man will create a chain of events over the next 34 years of his life that will affect all Americans, black and white. From 1881 to 1915, he will achieve what to many is considered the impossible. He will build one of the most impressive education institutions in all of Afro-America. He will, in addition, become the center of heated controversies, debates, even riots. And by the time of his death, his name will be known throughout the world.
You want to know about his days here, is that the idea?
That's right, General. I believe Washington was 16 when he came to Hampton.
You should have seen him when he got to the campus. He'd walked most of the way, 400 miles from the West Virginia coal country where he lived.
Samuel Chapman Armstrong, founder of Hampton Institute in Virginia. It was here under Armstrong that Booker T. Washington developed his ideas on industrial education.
He went back home to West Virginia after graduation, did some teaching, dabbled in politics, even went to a seminary in Washington for a bit. I brought him back here in '79, put him in charge of the Indian students. We had about 75 of them. He did a fine job indeed.
And then came Tuskegee?
That's right. And when those gentlemen asked my advice, it didn't take me long to make up my mind. History proved me right, don't you think?
Despite the obstacles and difficulties he confronts in setting up Tuskegee Institute, Washington maintains an optimism about the future of this place that most people find hard to accept. His first impressions of the town fill him with a sense of opportunity.
Before starting for Tuskegee, I found it almost impossible to locate on any map. But instead of finding my work in a low, marshy country as I expected, I find Tuskegee a beautiful, quiet town with a high and healthy location. As a rule, the colored people all through this section are poor and ignorant. But the one encouraging thing is that they see their weaknesses and are desirous of improving.
The reason I asked you to come today is I wanted you to see for yourselves that our first class is filling the room to the rafters.
His ability to influence important individuals and win their support for his visionary goals far exceed the modest hopes of his most ardent supporters for this backwoods school.
It will happen in a few months when the next group of students come. And the ones following that. I found a farm for sale, 100 acres. We'll have space for shops and classrooms. We'll need to advance several $100s to secure the property.
We don't have that kind of money.
I've contacted General James Marshall of Massachusetts. He's a dear friend of General Armstrong and quite well fixed. Like many wealthy white people in the North, he believes very strongly in our work here.
And he'll send the money.
He has sent the money.
Booker, you're always 3 steps ahead of everybody. You rascal. I suppose your Yankee benefactor will put up buildings, too.
No, sir. We will. If we need bricks, we'll make them. We're dedicated to an ideal, Mr. Campbell. Nothing is bought that the students can produce. It is our object to surround the student with such an air of business and industry that it will be next to impossible for him not to make himself felt in active business or some other sphere of usefulness.
Where's the next place you're gonna build?
I didn't come here to be no bricklayer.
What's that you said, Williams?
Nothing, sir.
Look, don't sass me, boy.
I said, I didn't come here to be a bricklayer.
I guess you'd rather be somewhere learning Greek. Is that what you think an education is all about? You're from Dothan, Alabama, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Tell me, Williams, do many Negroes in Dothan speak Greek?
No, sir. Of course not.
But they all need decent housing, don't they?
They need them real bad.
So you best feel you can serve your neighbor down in Dothan by speaking Greek to him or helping him to build a better house.
I understand, sir.
I hope so, Williams. I truly do. Now, let's get back to work.
Washington's iron will and strong sense of discipline wrought wonders. An institution began to grow out of the Alabama mud. For the South's young blacks, a new era of educational opportunity is dawning. One of the supreme ironies in Washington's career concerns the very contributions that allowed Tuskegee to expand and prosper. His critics will claim that by his dependence on the kindness of the Carnegies and the Rockefellers, the Baldwins to finance the Institute, Washington has become their unwitting tool, forced by his needs for their continued support into adopting positions that may not necessarily reflect the best interests of the country's blacks. Long Island Railroad President William Henry Baldwin, Jr. became Washington's great friend as well as his staunchest supporter. Mr. Baldwin, I understand that you're very supportive of Booker T. Washington.
Oh, yes. I'm for Mr. Washington because the work he's doing at Tuskegee is exactly right. Not just for the colored people, but for the entire South. He's not a firebrand, a rabble-rouser. He's a master politician who knows we're sitting on a powder keg. And he understands that most white people will never accept Negroes as their social equals. It's an impossibility.
Mr. Baldwin, I think there are many Negroes and some whites who would disagree with that statement.
And they are not intelligent or very realistic in their thinking. Oh, I know there are some liberal white people and some overeducated Negroes who seem to be talking against Tuskegee. But what they're really against, Booker T. Washington's politics.
His political role is growing then.
Of course. But his political enemies shouldn't let their opposition blind them to the simple fact that Tuskegee works. It is training thousands of Negroes and doing a fine job of it. Just look around the South. Schools based on his philosophy are springing up all over.
Among those applying for a teaching position is a Harvard man, W.E.B. Du Bois. Though accepted, he'll instead take a position at a black college in the Midwest and will become the premier black intellectual of his era, looming large in the controversies that will increasingly demonstrate the complexities of Washington's character. Under Washington's stewardship, the Institute is well on its way to becoming an educational model, uniquely suited to the needs of the Southern black community that Washington understands so well. He works ceaselessly, keeping abreast of every detail of the school's operations, continuing also his exhausting schedule of fundraising appearances. National recognition comes with his speech before the National Education Association in 1884, and also as a result of the nationwide success of his autobiography, Up From Slavery. America learns that there are blacks in the South seriously trying to shape their own destinies, developing plans for survival and advancement despite the hostility of many of their white neighbors. The word goes out that this little campus in the backwaters of Alabama is becoming a major force in Southern life. William Baldwin remembers.
It was the Atlanta Exposition that really put us over. Frederick Douglass had recently died, you see, and his death left a great vacuum in the Negro leadership. Booker T. Washington filled it.
The exposition was a big event.
The biggest. It was to show the world that the South was on its feet again, strong and proud, recovered from the war and Reconstruction. There were acres of exhibits. Every aspect of Southern life was on display. And Booker T. Washington stole the show. When he spoke at the opening day ceremonies, his was the voice of every Negro in the nation.
Well, perhaps not quite everyone.
On that day, my friend, he spoke for all of them. I was so nervous I couldn't even go into the hall. I just wandered around outside until I heard the applause. Wave upon wave of it. I thought it would never stop. If Washington had said the wrong thing, our years of work for Tuskegee would have been obliterated in a single day. But he didn't. That day, he spoke with an angel's silver tongue.
To those of my race who underestimate the importance of cultivating friendly relations with a Southern white man who is their next-door neighbor, I would say, cast down your bucket where you are. Cast it down by making friends in every manly way of the people of all races by whom we are surrounded. Cast it down in agriculture, in mechanics, in commerce, in domestic service, and in the professions. No race can prosper till it learns there is as much dignity in tilling a field as in writing a poem. Nor should we allow our grievances to overshadow our opportunities. In all things that are purely social, we can be as separate as the fingers. Yet as one as the hand in all things that are essential to mutual progress.
Overnight, he becomes, in the eyes of both black and white, the anointed leader of Negro America. W.E.B. Du Bois remembers.
It startled the nation to hear a Negro advocating such a program of accommodation after decades of our people's complaints. It startled and won the applause of the South. It interested and won the acclaim of the North. And after a confused murmur of protest, it silenced, if it didn't convert, the Negroes themselves.
So you supported Washington at this point?
As a matter of fact, I have it here. I wrote a letter to that effect. Here it is. My dear Mr. Washington, let me heartily congratulate you upon your phenomenal success at Atlanta. It was a word fitly spoken. I thought at the time that the Atlanta Compromise could be a step toward reaching a real settlement between blacks and whites throughout the South. Of course, the hardening of white attitudes and the blacks' subsequent loss of voting rights throughout the region killed any chance of that.
Pragmatist that he was, Washington had important considerations in calling for social separation in a South that was experiencing lynchings, floggings, and other forms of violence by the Ku Klux Klan and other vigilante groups. Perhaps he remembered the genocide of the parents and grandparents of his Indian students at Hampton Institute. In the Atlanta Compromise, he extended his diplomatic skills to their utmost. And we can be sure that he was vitally concerned with the safety and future of his beloved Tuskegee Institute, which he strongly believed was the key to Afro-America's success in the future. By the time of the Compromise, Tuskegee Institute is making valuable contributions to the advancement of the Southern white and black communities. There is much to preserve and protect. There are 37 buildings, and all but 3 built by the students' own hands. "700 acres of farmland under careful cultivation. A dairy and an assortment of livestock provide food and practical agricultural experience for the students. There are nearly 1,000 of them on campus. The curriculum offers instruction in 27 vocations in all of the building trades. Carriage and wagon making, harness making, millinery, printing, tailoring. Industrial education is coming of age. The 70-member faculty now includes the agricultural chemist George Washington Carver. He institutes, at Washington's request, a comprehensive agricultural outreach service, symbolized by the Jessup wagon. Also on the growing staff of distinguished individuals is Emmett J. Scott, a former journalist. He carries the title of private secretary to the man he calls the Wizard. Scott serves Washington with devotion and a measure of ruthlessness, powering the sophisticated political and public relations operation that Du Bois will come to term the infernal Tuskegee machine.
It's going to be a proud day for every Negro in the land, sir. Everything has been carefully planned down to the last flower on the floats. I'm setting the schedule to the White House this afternoon.
President McKinley wants some ideas for his speech. Write that he should say something to encourage colored people to get education, property, to build their character. Those things are the basis of good citizenship. And he should put in something about both races being moderate, friendly, self-controlled. Put it in your own words. I'll sign it.
I'll see to it immediately, sir. That editorial in Tuesday's Chicago Conservative was very unfair. It completely misrepresented your opinions.
The press is your department, Mr. Scott. Just be as tactful as possible.
You can depend on that, sir.
The president came, and it was indeed a grand and glorious day. A relationship is sealed. Washington's career as a formidable political power broker begins. The Oaks, designed by the talented black architect Robert Robinson Taylor, who was responsible for the design of most of the early campus buildings. Margaret Murray. After her first year on campus, Washington is so impressed by Miss Murray's work as a teacher that he selects her as the Institute's lady principal. Their relationship blossoms. On October 12, 1892, Margaret Murray and Booker T. Washington are married. Raised in a Quaker home and an honor graduate of Fisk University, Margaret Murray plays a major role in the Institute's growth. In addition to supervising the Institute's women's programs, she helps to organize self-help groups for black women in the town of Tuskegee and in the sharecropping communities in the surrounding countryside. As her husband becomes increasingly concerned with fundraising and political activities that take him away from Tuskegee for long periods, Mrs. Washington becomes, in fact, an extension of his presence on campus. From the standpoint of black survival in the hostile racial climate of the South, the effects of his diplomatic skill can be seen on both a national and local level.
Where is he? You're hiding that no-good nigger here.
This nigger can't be trusted.
Do you gentlemen, my neighbors, truly think that I would sacrifice our school here at Tuskegee for him? I'll turn Tom Harris away. If you want him, find him.
Let's go get him.
Come on, let's go over here.
Tell Scott to take my wagon and get Tom Harris to Dr. Cobb's house tonight. Tell him to get him out of the county tonight.
almost every paper damns you as an hypocrite. Booker T. Washington is a man who would cast his own brother into the claws of a bloodthirsty mob. Now you must tell them the real truth.
Tell them. Tell them what, Mr. Scott? The real truth. Tell them that my campus is a refuge for radicals. How long would Tuskegee last? Let them think what they will for the moment. This too shall pass.
But as America moves further and further away from Reconstruction, black aspirations for full and equal citizenship are increasingly repressed. Booker T. Washington's optimistic statements are no longer acceptable to many of the nation's black intellectuals. Men such as William Monroe Trotter. Trotter symbolizes the opposition of a growing number of black intellectuals to Washington's policies of accommodation. He denounces Washington's failure to forthrightly confront the dehumanizing aspects of Southern segregation. On July 30th, 1903, the confrontation with Washington, which Trotter has been seeking, comes to pass. They call it the Boston Riot. The meeting at which Washington is to speak becomes a shouting match. Washington is silent, seemingly detached from the turbulent scene. Police storm into the auditorium. Panic follows. Trotter and several of his colleagues are dragged from the church and arrested. Across the country, it is front-page news.
The so-called Boston Riot made the public aware, for the first time, really, that there was serious Negro opposition to Washington's policies. The press certainly couldn't ignore this event, although I'm sure they would have liked to. When now they were forced to publish Trotter's opinions, people saw that many of his criticisms were valid. And after he served a 30-day jail sentence, there was the feeling, and I shared it, that Washington and Scott were persecuting the man. So, from the point of view of the opposition, the demonstration was a rousing success.
And you began to move into the enemy camp?
The machine was pushing me in that direction. Washington built Tuskegee, a great institution, but I'm afraid he was a captive of his own political ambitions. He would brook no opposition or criticism, particularly from his fellow Afro-Americans.
First, let's talk about Du Bois and Trotter, the great northern intellectuals. It's easy to be critical of America when you live in the North. They're frustrated aristocrats chattering on about the talented 10th at the expense of the black masses. What do they know about the sharecropper's life? Or do they know about the terrible fears that every black man, woman, and child has to live with every day of their lives in the South? Now, the South is where the overwhelming majority of our people live. Now and forever, that must be the central fact in defining a political position for black people in this country, not some abstract demand for justice.
But Du Bois has spent some years in the South, Mr. Washington, has he not?
But he doesn't feel it here, where it counts. This is my land, and these are my people. I'm fighting for what's best for the masses of American Negroes. Du Bois is a frustrated snob. He's turned his back on the black masses. This Booker T. Washington will never do.
Mr. Washington, we have uncovered evidence that through your supporters, you and Emmett Scott have attempted to subvert black opposition to your policies, and that the so-called Tuskegee machine has tried to destroy economically men such as William Monroe Trotter, who have
never done anything of the kind.
Spoken out against your leadership of the race. How would you react to that, sir?
Young man, history will be my judge, not you.
As the 19th century fades into history, Washington's star reaches its zenith. More than ever, his tireless fundraising activities swell the coffers of Tuskegee and other southern schools that follow his philosophy of industrial education. Tuskegee continues to prosper under his leadership. Despite the raging controversies, considered tragic by many, there will be 50 buildings on campus, 2,000 students, and an endowment that exceeds $2 million. 2,000 black men and women will have graduated from the Institute. 5 times that number have spent some time in their lives absorbing the Tuskegee spirit. On a personal level, Washington and his family are amply provided for by his friend, Andrew Carnegie. So much so that he is able to give up his salary at Tuskegee. At home, Washington finds rest and relaxation in his morning rides on his horse, Dexter, and in tending to his livestock and his garden. But by 1913, his health is beginning to fail. While on a fundraising tour, he collapses in New York. Margaret Murray Washington remembers.
There were so many things he wanted to do for Tuskegee.
Mrs. Washington, I realize this is very painful for you, but could you recall, or could you try to recall the final days? You needn't answer the question, of course.
I got the telegram and headed right away for the station. I don't remember much about the ride north. Just that I prayed a lot. And I cried a lot. I got to New York. There was a car waiting to take me to St. Luke's Hospital. I went into the room. The doctors were there. Mr. Scott was there. The doctors said that there was a chance they could save him if he stayed in New York. After they finished talking, I turned to my husband. He read the question in my eyes. And he said, "Margaret, I was born in the South. I've lived and labored in the South. And I will die and be buried in the South. So we brought him home."
He survives the arduous train trip home by a mere 5 hours. On the morning of November 14th, Booker T. Washington passes peacefully away. He is buried in the campus cemetery. 10,000 people gather to pay their last respects. Messages of condolence are received from around the world. Memorial services are held across America. W.E.B. Du Bois, though the foremost black opponent of Washington's racial and political philosophy, pays a final tribute to the Wizard of Tuskegee.
Booker T. Washington was the greatest Negro leader since Frederick Douglass, and the most distinguished man, white or black, who has come out of the South since the Civil War. Of the good that he accomplished, there can be no doubt.
Throughout the history of Afro-America, Washington's influence can be found almost everywhere. The economic program of Marcus Garvey and the self-help movement of the 1960s, calling for economic self-determination, all had their origins in Washington's philosophy. At the beginning of the Civil War, 4 million black people were living in slavery. Booker Taliaferro Washington was one of them. The turbulent and to this day controversial life is over. The legacy of Tuskegee endures.